today amidst the weather that's here in the area, and we appreciate you having us very much. So.
Thank you for that nice introduction and for making
you.
this all possible. We want to start out today by learning a little bit about you all, and we know there's faculty and librarians potentially and other staff here. So if you're faculty, would you raise your hand, please? Okay. Librarians? Okay. And what else do you all do? Students and or other staff? Students? Okay.
Great.
What majors?
I'm an MFA student in the intermediate program in the school partner.
Okay.
MFA Literary Translation, and I work in the Language Media Center.
Okay, awesome. And faculty, librarian, where do you fall on the continuum? Faculty?
Oh yes, I teach Spanish and Portuguese.
Oh, okay, cool. Awesome. Yeah, maybe we'll just go around since it's a small group.
I teach design furniture in interior design. I already work with VR,
Okay.
not augmented reality. So I'm just curious to find out what you guys do. So I'm with the School of Art and History too. I'm the head of the training design program.
Awesome.
Nice.
I teach Spanish in the Spanish department.
Awesome. Okay.
I do Japanese.
I'm Japanese.
Staff in the LMC.
Okay. Cool. And where were we? And we know Kelly, or maybe everybody else is in that.
Education and psychology librarian. Studio manager at Distance and Online Ed.
Okay.
I teach Japanese language.
Yeah, I'm teaching Korean.
Good.
Well, plug everyone. Claire already introduced us, but I'm Sean.
And I'm Sarah.
And today we're talking about our virtual immersive teaching and learning initiative, which is a collaboration across the California State University system, which is 23 campuses, but it was born out of San Diego State and Sonoma State University.
So the workshop outcomes today that you will be exposed to is knowing the 4 elements of immersive learning, identifying scenarios to be taught in an immersive learning scenario, and align immersive learning activities and assessments with learning outcomes that are relevant to your classes and so forth.
And we do have some handouts that we'll be referencing throughout. If you didn't get one, maybe Kelly, would you?
Okay.
Okay, thank you.
Just one of each. Yeah.
One of those. So, the ethos that we have adopted and kind of worked through in developing this VITaL initiative goes back to this adage a couple millennia ago from Confucius, which we've adapted. We've taken the liberty to adapt to include immerse. Tell me and I will forget, show me and I may remember, immerse me and I will understand.
So immersion is really the key to learning from a first-person perspective. But how about if you do not have a scenario where you're able to take, for example, all your students to, there you go. What if you wanted to take a field trip and you can't take everybody to somewhere like underwater, or experiencing another country, or going back in time to see how things have evolved, or even something as extreme as going to Mars yet, right? So, however, with the scenarios we present today, immersive learning environments are possible. And we're going to show you how you can bring that experience to your students.
So what is immersive learning? How many people have actually tried VR? Sounds like some are already working with it. Has everyone else gotten a chance to try VR in some capacity? Okay, so about half. So VR is one thing, which the XR encompasses all 3. We'll talk a little more about that. But that's just one component. So Jeremy Bailenson out of Stanford back in the mid-2000s developed this concept of immersive learning that really requires 4 components. So it requires the cutting-edge VR technology, but it also requires a spatial design that leverages the unique capacity of this, like going to an underwater reef, like going back in time and seeing around. And we're going to talk about some differences in scale and some things that aren't visible to the human eye as well. It also should incorporate advanced learning theory and an instructional design consideration, and you should also be assessing the effectiveness through assessment and also through the unique capacity of VR, like eye tracking and gaze and things like that. So collectively, these 4 elements are immersive learning, and they're used to develop experiential learning by simulating real-world phenomena. So this goes back to a couple millennia after Confucius, but to 1994, Milgram's reality-virtuality continuum, where he asserted that this whole mixed reality, virtual reality spectrum exists on a spectrum, on a continuum from the real environment to the virtual environment. So in the real environment, we have augmented reality where you can use a cell phone, for example, and use the camera to view contextualized information as an overlay, like these kind of Yelp-esque reviews on top of the businesses themselves using the GPS and using the camera. And on the other end is the virtual environment, so actually using virtual reality and a head-mounted display like this. Actually, this is MR, but like this is VR. This HMD, or head-mounted display as it's called, can transport you into a totally virtual environment. So different place, different scale, different time, etc. And then the middle is mixed reality, which combines the two. So it takes virtual content and it combines it into the physical environment such that you can interact with it, not just as an overlay, but as a thing that's placed in space. And we're going to show some live demos if they cooperate with that in a little bit. So collectively, these three, jumping forward 26 years now to 2020, are collectively known as XR. This has changed a little bit, but the industry and academia in particular has standardized on extended reality. So if you're talking about all of these writ large, VR is kind of in pop culture kind of become the catch-all term, but XR in the industry encompasses all of these.
So AR, augmented reality, brings anything to you. And some examples of this is utilizing interactive textbooks where you can use a tablet, for example, with an AR app on there to bring your textbook to life. So here in this example, you can actually see the sun and various aspects of moon phases in this particular app. One that maybe pertains better to this crowd is Google Translate, where you can take an app on your cell phone and take a picture of a sign and have that being translated to the language that you speak, especially when traveling in foreign countries.
For some just-in-time knowledge, like there's a cliff ahead, you might want to know
Be
that,
careful.
if you don't speak Italian. So VR, as we said, brings you anywhere, so it can bring you inside of a human vein. This is an app called the Body VR, available on the Steam store, which we'll talk a little bit more about, where you can travel. I love the magic school bus analogy we were talking to earlier, where you can actually go inside a human vein and see what the red blood cells floating by look like and things like that. Or you can go to the Parthenon, the Acropolis, and see what that would have looked like a couple thousand years ago within VR, kind of on the site there.
And at Google Expeditions, we have a few of those headsets here, so that's an example of what students might use in your classroom if that's what you use in the classroom. So MR, or mixed reality, actually bridges the gap between both the physical and the virtual. And this is where you have computer-generated graphics that are overlaid to your environment around you. And these devices, you can actually see both your physical and virtual together. The difference, however, between this and augmented reality, as Sean said, is that with MR, you are interacting with that simulation. So an example of this in the HoloLens, which is this device right here, is to utilize or interact with various machinery. For example, let's say someone was in industry or was an engineer, perhaps. Also, another example of using the HoloLens is this one right here, which I know I just heard we have 2 faculty at least who are in the teaching Japanese. And so in this particular example, Microsoft announced over the summer that they are working on a proof of concept for an app in Japanese translation. So we're going to go ahead and play this video for you today. So notice the speaker is wearing the HoloLens here.
First, let me introduce you to Mini-Me. There she is, my perfect hologram. And thanks to the power of HoloLens 2, she just floats right with me. I'm literally holding my hologram, so natural. Now she's a little small to do a keynote. So let's get her up so she can do full-size Japanese keynote. Render keynote.
私たちは最新の複合現実キャプチャー技術を使用し、私のホログラムを作成しています。実在の人物をホログラムとして見たことがあるかもしれませんが、私が実際に日本語を話しているのが新しいのです。私は日本語を話しませんが、私の声とホログラムは完璧な日本語で話しています。
So obviously, if everyone was
Can I hear
wearing
from-
HoloLens, you'd be able to see both of those, the holographic and the physical person.
And I saw the two faculty here.
It was real Japanese.
Yeah, exactly.
I have a question about that. Would that have been like a preloaded translation into, because the hologram is sort of, seemed like it was spewing something that was already preloaded.
Yeah.
So advances with artificial intelligence, I'm suspecting they're still working on that kind of stuff, but I think what they're aiming for is to create something on the spot to be translated as we speak into it. So I'm assuming that they are heavily utilizing and relying on artificial intelligence for that part, yeah.
So you could, if you were a Japanese speaker, you could put that on and see the keynote happening in parallel in Japanese.
As they're speaking, yeah.
It's kind of interesting. I could hear the accent.
Yeah.
Is it intentionally put like foreign accent?
Mm. Probably just the person that was translating.
It could be, yeah, I'm not sure. It could be the way the AI was programmed.
Was it American accent in Japanese?
Can determine like if it's American, but it's not definitely like someone from Japan.
See, we're actually going to, we didn't ask them to move. We're going to have you move and be next to somebody that's not a faculty, and that's the importance of having interdisciplinary teams, so that when you present something like this, it's actually good Japanese and not a heavily accented Japanese. But that's, yeah, and our teamwork and other examples that we're going to show is a crucial part of having teams, so the content you're developing is actually true.
So what you've observed so far is just a few examples of what's available and relevant to what's out there right now. How about what's relevant to the classroom, right? Because we're in an environment where this is our vision, right? So we're focusing on students and student learning. And it's really great to see, but there is actually a really growing database of evidence to show that student success is possible utilizing these modalities. And these are just some of the research that we are citing for this particular area here.
And we'll share these slides too, so you can dig into this. So transcending education, this has gone from something that researchers like Jeremy Bailiffson, who we referenced earlier, have been researching, to industry. So that professor from Stanford started a company called Striver a few years ago. They were initially in entertainment with the Kings, I think, the sports teams, and seeing virtual environments of live sporting events. And recently, in the last couple of years, they got into training. So they partnered with Walmart to study 150,000 Walmart associates, and they found that it resulted in increased skills and knowledge and employee satisfaction. So since then, Walmart has invested in 17,000 headsets, which is a pretty considerable investment, to train 1 million associates. And the key is here that they're shipping these headsets out to rural locations. They're no longer sending their whole training team to these locations, just the headsets. And it's just as effective, if not more effective, than the trainings they did in person. Secondly, government. So you may have heard about Microsoft and the Department of Defense's somewhat controversial arrangement where the Department of Defense found it so effective that they spent about $500 million in HoloLenses. And this is the HoloLens 2. You can see it's a little different than the ones we have. They're currently back-ordered right now, so I think we both have orders in for them, but I think the government's ahead of us in line. But they're using that for training and for live combat.
So what's the relevance to all this? Well, it's important to take a look at the diverse applications of what can be done in VR or AR or MR, so the XR realm. So this slide here by Statista projects that by the year 2025, there's a multi-billion-dollar industry revolving around this technology. Specifically, and it's not surprising, 54% of the demand will be towards the consumer end. So XR video games, entertainment, football games in XR, etc. The other portion of this pie chart here touches upon the items that Sean was talking about. So in terms of retail, military, also healthcare, engineering, real estate. And the part that we're probably more interested in here for the time being is education. But this is only projected to be about 2% of the demand. Now, this can go a few ways. One, is that there's already some existing software for education that exists out there, and companies are around to create this content. And we're going to talk today about ways that you can actually access content or create your own content. However, we can look at this also in another light, as an opportunity to train our current students so that when it does come time for them to get hired, they can be marketable for this demand, and they can be ready to go and work in this environment should they choose to.
So, as I mentioned, this VITaL initiative is a collaboration between our two campuses and has since expanded across the 23 campuses of the CSU. Between our two campuses right now, we have 62 courses integrating immersive learning. That ranges from freshman level general astronomy courses up to physical therapy at the doctoral level. So a diverse range of disciplines, journalism to anatomy, engineering to advertising, all over the spectrum. We currently have about 15 research publications that have been accepted or are currently in review. 4 student organizations made up of students that want to just come build apps and experiment and partner with faculty. We'll talk a little more about that. And over 1,000 students who have learned via VR. Excellent.
So one instructional challenge that I came up with as a faculty member is that for my electrical engineering students, most students who are in taking engineering or physics have to learn physics. They have to learn about electrical current, magnetic fields, and these are things that it's impossible to actually see, such as, they're invisible. However, there is a way to envision them and use that through XR. I did not find anything that was relevant to my classes. So as I'm teaching the introductory level coursework, I thought, well, since there's nothing out there that's relevant for my class, what if we make something? So I went on a journey and I built together a team. This is my team that was a part of this experience. The key thing is not just about making this stuff, it's also about who is a part of this team. So the team was actually multidisciplinary in nature. 2 of the students here are from the computer science department. So both of these students did the computer programming as well as the 3D modeling for this app. My student here, he was the electrical engineering student, so he was the subject matter expert and offered all the expertise behind what was in the app. And my student here is an anthropology student, and her take on things is user experience. How does the user feel when they experience this app, and what works best for them? She also brought in an accessibility portion, because in the gaming industry, they tend to not really focus on that for everybody, but in academia, we do focus on that. So she brought that expertise to the table. And this is the electric circuits app that the students have created, and I think we might be able to have a live demo today.
Moments away. There we go.
I was sort of demoing it for you a little bit earlier.
It's like
And we have a backup video.
Oh, it's coming. Here we
It's
go.
coming? Okay. So this is the Microsoft HoloLens, and I had already prepared the electrical engineering app for you here. It's actually, can you all see it?
Yep.
Great. So the main screen is actually right in front of you, and it's not on it, so I'm going to click on that, and there's something over there.
So you can see she's using hand gestures because there's infrared cameras on the front of the device. So there's no controller, it's scanning the whole room as she goes, and using hand gestures to click. You may need to relaunch the app.
Yeah, let me close it out because I had lost it. So here's the database. So it's basically a computer. You have all these apps that are in here. And let's see, circuit apps. There's electrical circuits apps right there. So you notice Unity. We'll talk about that in just a moment.
Welcome to the Electrical Circuits app. Introduction will get you more familiar with the components or select. This is the tutorial to the Electrical Circuits app. Here we will be connecting various components onto the breadboard into a simple circuit. To start, select the LED. Select the volt to place the positive lead.
So this basically allows a student with experience or no experience using a
Select the
breadboard
goal to place the negative leads.
to be able to build a circuit either as an introductory experience or maybe to refresh what they've done from before, maybe going back into another class. Oops, did you go away? Did I stop paying attention to you? Oh, there you are, okay. So here they are building.
Select the 270 ohm resistor.
So this is just a small example of what
Select the
someone
holes
could
to
do.
place the resistor.
Now, let me just tell you about the app itself. It's a bit buggy,
Now select the wire.
but it's entirely student-made, and they built it in 6 weeks. So it's quite impressive for 6 weeks, I would say. And this is their very first time building using Unity, however, working together, and their very first time working together as a team. So I feel very proud of what they've done and what they've been able to accomplish. And this gives you the gist of what a student can do. So again, I can see all of you, but I see all of the, can you see all of the components sitting right in front of you there? Yes. So this is just one example of what can be used with mixed reality and what students have created.
So along those same lines, one of the instructional challenges at SDSU came from the School of Nursing. The director and several faculty were concerned that students going through the simulation center with big mannequins, the simulation center is a multi-million-dollar center, and the mannequins themselves cost $100,000, $200,000, $300,000. They weren't able to perform certain scenarios that require more human behavior and more dynamic skin tones, things like that. And that the students in their clinical rounds, which represented 50% of their experience, weren't getting these things, A, that were rare and happen just occasionally in the clinic, but also things that should never happen in the clinic, like somebody dying from anaphylactic shock should never happen. We have the treatments to cure that very quickly, but they still wanted students to see what these never events look like. So this was working. Oh, there we go. So we collaborated with, San Diego State University, we collaborated with our Imperial Valley campus, which is 100 miles east of San Diego, so very rural. They do not have a simulation center. They actually had to bring their students 2 hours west to the coast to use our simulation center. And we talked a little bit this morning about how that has implications internationally in places like sub-Saharan Africa, where they don't have access to some of these technologies at all. Something like this could be shipped there. Claremont Graduate University, this was actually during my doctoral study, so this became my dissertation research. Texas Tech, so this gentleman here, who's a standardized patient actor, trained to do this kind of thing, is from Texas Tech, from their simulation center. Microsoft provided the space where we captured these volumetric videos up in Seattle, and Pearson, who helped with the software. So the idea here is that this nursing students can experience this in their clinical simulation centers. You can see these are less expensive mannequins, but they're still $10,000, $15,000, and they use them in the beds that mirror the actual clinic, but in this case we have a dynamic patient that can actually go through the different phases of anaphylactic shock. So I'm going to quickly see if I can demonstrate this live, just because it's kind of cool to bring it down in the audience, and if not, we can always do it afterward. Please. HDMI. All right. So you see Jared there? Yeah. So this is Jared. So there's a couple limitations of the hardware. And is anybody coming tomorrow to forecast? So we're going to be talking a little bit more about like our projections and what's happening in the industry. But this is the HoloLens 1. We know the HoloLens 2 is out, and there's lots of other projections like from Apple and others that should be game changers. But in this case, I'm only seeing a certain portion of his body at a time because of the field of view. But it is still pretty incredible that I can walk around him. I can see the laceration on his back here. We're going to talk a little bit more about assessment, but that's a key component of the assessment that the student must determine, okay, based on these factors, that may be what has happened to him. And I can actually play through and see dynamically what his response is to these different symptoms and as a nursing student, I should say, okay, there's hives, he seems to have elevated breathing, discomfort, I should probably call the code and get the doctor in here. And if I don't do that, I can see what happens if it escalates, where his breathing actually becomes more rapid, more agitated. In the case study, they would read that his heart rate is going up, his blood pressure is going up, and if they still don't act, everything goes down. So his heart rate slows, his breaths per minute slow, and he essentially is dying of anaphylactic shock right here. So somewhat of a proof of concept. This isn't interactive in the sense that I can't say, hey Jared, how are you feeling, what's happening? But those are the kinds of recommendations our study, as far as the qualitative components, came to, and that's what we recommended to Pearson and Microsoft for future iterations on this.
So, we want to ask you, what is a challenge for your students that you could possibly see this type of technology assisting with? So we're going to give you a little bit of time. We had originally, we had forgotten to mention this, but we had originally wanted all of you to be sitting next to someone who you probably are not working with. So perhaps faculty sitting next to library folks, sitting next to students, and we're going to ask you to get together in pairs of 2 or 3 or 4, whatever works for you. So you can answer this question as well as other questions we're going to be posing to you. So maybe just take a minute to rearrange yourself. Let's see if faculty, if you can all rearrange yourself, faculty and library and students perhaps as a group. Go ahead and take a few moments to do that.
How that looks like in certain spaces. So it would be amazing to be able to share that, you know, not looking at a computer screen. But although we do use VR, but it's limited in the sense that the number of people can't see the same thing at the same time.
So spatial design?
Spatial design is something that will help students understand, you know, in location what they're doing, yeah.
And human scale too, I think.
Human scale is a big thing, yeah.
Well,
about this group? Yes, you. Your group?
Oh, I can. Yeah, we got like a little bit distracted by the technology, but I've been using VR a little bit in the past, and it's very useful when you're learning the language to move the students somewhere else and let them interact in like different situations, be immersed in a different context, that cultural things that they cannot experience in the classroom. So it's kind of like more pushing down the barriers. Like it's not only the students that can study abroad because they have money, but all the other students can like travel and experience other things.
So the challenge is barriers exist to cultural immersive experiences.
Yes.
This can help break the barriers.
I think another challenge for language educators is getting students to retain vast amounts of vocabulary, of course, and internalize grammar rules. And it occurred to me that, so VR, I love how you said that VR brings you anywhere and AR brings the world to you, right? That's the distinction, the in and out kind of thing.
You got it.
And it seems to me that AR has some great capacities or affordances in making sort of a new wave of flashcards, right? So you can wave your phone over something and have all of your vocabulary pop up. And I think that would be really cool.
Flashcards. Amazing. Oh, sorry. About this group over here?
So we talked about being able to transport your students to pretty much any location. I'm not from the language department. My example was a nanofabrications course that we teach here that is online, and so students can actually interact with the lab equipment online, but if they could have some sort of immersion when they're interacting with the lab equipment more than just static webcam. There's lots of opportunities for that, or to have them see what it's like when the when wafers are actually being etched and stuff like that.
Over here?
Yeah, so I was curious, how much we can be interactive in this environment. So with this AI technology, we can communicate, basically with this kind of machine. So if we can talk to people, wearing that, and for example, go to Seoul and go to a coffee shop and place an order, with the person there, that would be great. But I don't know how much this technology has been developed. So natural conversation is kind of difficult to achieve by using this technology yet, I guess. So yeah, there's so much potential for that.
It's getting there, yeah. Magic Leap has done some interesting stuff. I forget what their kind of Cortana Siri avatar is called, but Magic Leap has something. Magic Leap is one of the big companies. They have something on the horizon that is that exact thing, that you can, an AI kind of virtual 3D bot that you can interact with.
And kind of adding on to that, is there a way to like socialize through these, so actually like you could meet someone somewhere who maybe is in Seoul, and so you're having sort of a language exchange, but you can like meet at a coffee shop, for example, and then be able to talk about like real, like, oh, look at that person doing that or drinking that coffee or whatever, and like have these sort of natural conversations. Is that possible?
So there is an app called VR Chat. It exists. And you could actually go into a VR room with someone else, and there's an avatar that takes your place. But you can actually speak with that person, and they speak back with you. And there are two people in the room at the same time. So there are capabilities. There are other apps out there. This is the one I just heard about. One of my colleagues at our local junior college uses it. And so we're looking at that as a possible collaborative space for students to interact virtually.
There's a couple other too. There's Facebook Spaces, which has since been turned into Oculus Spaces, something like that, where you actually can hang out in a virtual space with a digital avatar. And the cool thing is you can bring up like 360 images from your Facebook timeline or 2D images and kind of interact with them, sketch on them. And you can be hanging out with your friend in Seoul or your friend down the street or whatever. It's pretty cool. A little uncanny and creepy with the avatar thing, in my opinion, but it's still very cool. And then there's other software, like there's a company called Memesys or Mimesys, I'm not sure how you pronounce it, out of France that actually uses Microsoft Kinect, which are similar to the array of cameras that we used for the nursing patient. It's just two cameras that are like $100, $125 each that you can do a live stream of a hologram. So it is, there are kind of proof of concept and early kind of startups around this stuff, so it is possible, and likely it'll, you know, beam me up Scotty kind of thing will happen in the near future. All right, thank you all for sharing. So now that you have your idea, we're going to present a toolkit that you could apply to that idea.
So the first one is, well, maybe develop your own custom apps. So how do you get started with that? And what are some examples? Well, partner up with others to create the app. For example, on our campus, this is our VR club. They are one of those student organizations who not only use VR to play around in and have fun, but they also learned how to develop. So you can partner with a student organization to develop. Or, as in my case with the electric circuits app, as well as with the second project, or this, not even second, this is our fourth project we're working on now, this is a water cycle app. So we partnered up with students from different backgrounds. So we definitely have the computer science students, but we also, for this particular one, had also worked with hydrology students as the subject matter experts. And we also included a student from the Spanish department because he translated the app for us in Spanish. So now we have an app and it's going to be ready to launch very, very soon. But again, it consisted of all these partners on campus to make this actually happen. So what you need, you definitely need a gaming engine. So a gaming engine is how you would actually put this together. Some examples of things, ones that are out there that are pretty popular, Unity and Unreal. This particular example, the students used Unreal for this one. The electric circuits app I showed you, they had used Unity. So that means you definitely need to know some programming languages, so C#, C++. And of course, this is intermediate to advanced type of experience. So definitely I would encourage you to know who's on campus and work with students who can learn this and be able to use it with you. So definitely leverage, just one more. So definitely leverage your campus resources, so not just student organizations, but partner with your library, partner with your faculty center, partner with your instructional designers to be able to piece this together in a meaningful way for what you need.
So if you don't necessarily know C# or have access to students or partners that do. Another option is to use create and play, plug and play, drag and drop, all kind of synonymous platforms to create your own content, and also use 360 imagery and video. So a couple examples of platforms that you can use. Google Expeditions is a platform that exists as an app where you can both guide and be a student in an expedition that's comprised of 360 images, like this one, instead of NASA's facilities that they made for Women's Month, something like that, where they were actually showing female scientists inside of NASA, and you could look around the space, see her in her context, and read about what she does. Also, Stellar X and Wanda VR are both examples of platforms that you can build interactive apps with without knowing these programming languages. So the hardware for this, you can capture this stuff with just your cell phone. There's plenty of free photo stitching apps and some very cheap ones that you can take photos all around and create a 360 image. The issue with that is that it's static, so it's great for expeditions, for example, where you're just kind of looking around a room. But if you want to show a dynamic video of underwater, or somewhere that you want to take your students, Spain, etc., you can use a 360 camera. I have a couple examples here of cameras that we check out, and I believe your library does as well. Is that right?
Engineering library.
Engineering library that you have access to. So this is a kit comprised of a Samsung Gear 360, and you can actually see all of the hardware that we have at SDSU on the VITaL handout. But these are now like $80 on Amazon if you wanted to buy one. Samsung Gear 360 captures the whole room, video or photo all at the same time. And then this is one that they just released that we just got, the Gopro 360 Max, that has a monitor on here so you can see what you're capturing. And it's water resistant, I think, to like 30 feet or something. Pretty amazing. $500. So you can capture that content and then bring your students anywhere into that 360 video. The main limitation of that is you're not actually walking around the space like Sarah and I were. You're fixed to a point and you're looking around. But it's still pretty phenomenal, especially for not knowing any programming to create it. So we consider that beginner to advanced.
So both of these two examples that we just showed you is actually developing your own content. But there's actually a lot of content already built out there. So between companies, professional companies creating things like that, or other universities, or just in general. So we're going to talk about how to leverage pre-existing software and see how that meets your needs as faculty or instructional designers or whatever needs that need to be met. So examples of this is Google Earth VR. So you can actually explore the Earth and go to different countries virtually. And if street mode is enabled, just like you would on Google Maps, you can go into street mode, you can do the same in VR. And here's an example of street mode for visiting Candlestick Park in San Francisco. So that's just one example of what you can do that is pertainable to languages and study abroad and so forth. Google Translate is another example of that. Newton's House of Forces, so this example in particular, you can leverage taking like a ball and throwing it and just figuring out how much force do I need to actually break down these blocks and so forth. And there's other examples in that particular app. So the tools for this, you would need some sort of XR hardware, head-mounted display, and VR-capable computer. So leveraging what is available on your campus to see what meets the need for your particular class. The software that would be required to use for this are apps that you could find in a repository called Steam, that's just one example, or the Microsoft Store, or other examples such as the Oculus Store or the Rift Store, etc. And that really is dependent upon which device you are using. So the expertise for this would be beginner level. And we're going to talk right now about how to access these apps. So using pre-existing apps with XR head-mounted display devices, we're going to go to the Steam store. So this is steampower.com. And for this particular one, this repository is available to all types of games, not just virtual reality. So if you are a gamer, you can find games for your PC, for various platforms like Xbox or other. And so for example...
Just search VR language while you were turning around.
Yeah. So So searching for anything, I just wanted to click on VR just to show what else is on there. If you just go to VR, sorry, search for VR, if you don't mind.
Sure.
Just VR. You can see that there's actually lots and lots of options, but they're not all educationally based. So you're going to find a lot of first-person shooter, you're going to find a lot of things that are not appropriate.
Space Truckin' and Elite Dangerous is totally educational.
It's totally educational. It might be, maybe that's the lesson plan, I don't know. So the idea is, how can you figure out what works? And did you want to pull up that one that was VR language that you saw?
Oh yeah, I just randomly clicked. I mean, I was just encouraging you to type in keywords that might make sense. We haven't vetted this, but we're going to show you some vetting.
Yeah, so this is one that I'm not familiar with, but it looks like it's been out since 2017. So looking at examples, this is language tutoring in VR, and it's free, so that's great, but not all of them might work to what you're looking for. So some recommendations. So I'm going to ask you to consult this handout that's in front of you that's titled XR App Vetting Procedure. So this is a set of instructions that our student assistant actually created because it's his job to actually do that for our campus, is to vet through the apps that faculty might want to go through. But it's actually a really good document he put together. And you could actually see at the very bottom of here, resources by device. So depending on the device, there are a few different repositories where you can search for apps. It's not all in one place is what I'm trying to say, right? So you're going to have to look for things. However, he did create a flow chart on the back of this page, and the flow chart basically is the process of what you can do to vet for an app. So first of all, finding a new potential app for academic technology. So does it relate to a specific experience that faculty can actually use in the classroom? If yes, test the app, and test the app in its entirety, okay? Does this app, is it safe for work, right? SFW. So if there's blood or nudity or whatever the case may be, if it's applicable, I don't know. It depends on faculty and what they're teaching. If yes, then our checklist is, we'll make sure our VITaL lab has the appropriate resources to support the faculty and to support the students, and to implement this into a lesson plan. So second step here, determine what is that best plan to determine what's the best plan to implement into the lesson plan. So can you put this, maybe do a trial run? Is it this just extra credit? Is it some other type of part for your syllabus here? And lastly, writing a basic guide so students can actually use this when it comes time. So key aspects of the procedure is determining themes and subjects related to the app. Is this an informative experience, or is it just a unique experience, maybe related to a lesson plan? Hopefully that's the whole point of this, right? Or could this be applied before or during or after a particular lesson? So, did you want to say something?
Sure, yeah. So yeah, at this point, we're running a little low on time. We knew this was happening because we did this in the morning, and the same thing happened. So I want, as long as we have the room, we're probably going to go 15 minutes over. If you need to leave right at 3, please go ahead at 3, and otherwise we'll keep going. I just want you looking at the clock. Wait, are we wrapping up? So at this point, we'd like you to circle back with your group and think about, given that toolkit, given those options, how you might address that challenge. And we know you won't have time to go on Steam, et cetera, to look for all the apps, but are you thinking, I want to do a custom app because I know exactly what I want and I have a team, or I might check out or borrow a 360 camera or utilize one of those kind of plug and play platforms, or I'm pretty sure there's something out there that, that I can find that can work for me. So just take maybe a minute and a half, 2 minutes to talk about that with your group. Anybody want to share out something that they discovered with their group? Maybe 1 or 2 groups? Or something you'd like to share? Anybody like already made a partnership in this room? What were you gonna say here?
Oh, I was just gonna say the Google Earth and the maps looks like it would be really, there would be a lot of potential for me just for teaching culture. And I teach literature, culture, and history, and so I would be interested in looking into more about kind of historical views of certain spaces, but even contemporary spaces.
Have you done Google Earth VR? No. It's like the coolest thing the human race has made. It's like phenomenal. We're able to go anywhere in the world and see 3D buildings. Like Sarah was saying with Street View, you can take the orb, put it on your head, and see any street in any place that they have that in the world. It's really cool. We have a religious studies instructor who's using that to visit sites. His whole research is on Jainism in India and I think maybe Nepal too. And he's taking his students to places that he's captured with the 360 cameras and studying those from that perspective. It's really successful.
I would just add a layer to that I was just telling Marcel about is that you can then upload the 360 tour into a platform like ThingLink and annotate it, which is what Braden just did on a tour that he made of the LMC. So you can annotate, like put little dots on it and then explain, explanatory stuff. And then that's a model for then the students could do a project like that, right? You can send them on a virtual field trip and then have them annotate that in their target language, obviously would be a good idea, but.
ThingLink?
ThingLink, yeah.
I learn something new every time I talk about it. So there's a lot of those kind of create and play or plug and play apps out there. Google Expeditions is kind of the most ubiquitous one just because it's Google and they have the reach for it, but it's the same kind of deal where you have the hotspots and then you have the information that comes up. But there's dozens of platforms like that now that do that. Anything else you guys want to share?
Okay. So one of the instructional challenges at Sonoma State is that students were struggling to identify parts of the heart. And so we found this app that's used by ShareCare. It's a free app, pre-existing, found on Steam. And one of our faculty who teaches Bio 115 created instructions for this, and students would go to the lab in pairs. One would read the instructions out loud, the second one would be in the immersive experience. And they would learn about parts of the heart and so forth. And some of the learning objectives that the faculty had for the students were: describe the location and the position of the heart within the body, describe the internal and external anatomy of the heart, identify the tissue layers of the heart, and compare systemic circulation to pulmonary circulation. So talking about creating instructions, one important key aspect of this is creating learning objectives. What do you do with this? Now, in this particular case, and what I recommend for all XR cases is that these are supplements to what you teach in the class. They don't replace anything, right? So there's always more beneficial to get that one-on-one instruction from your faculty. So maybe to the next slide here. So posing this question, what might be your learning objectives? So take a few minutes to talk with each other about that.
You have one or more of your learning objectives that you just identified in mind, because of course if you have learning objectives, now you have something to assess. So we're going to talk about some assessment strategies, given that in XR it's a little bit different than the normal modalities that we all teach in. So one option is in-app assessment. So this is an app that our astronomy department, we actually partnered on some other astronomy research using existing apps, but one thing that other app couldn't do is a phenomenon called Parallax, which is if you see two objects and you move your head side to side, you can tell which one's closer by the degree to which they each move relative to one another. So it turns out, and one of the cool things about being involved with these faculty is you learn a lot about all these processes. That's how they determine how far away stars are. They know an object that's closer, they know that distance, and then they see the parallax effect, and they can say, okay, that star is 3 billion light years away. So in this app, the students can actually draw the angle and actually calculate then, based on that angle, what the distance is from the Earth. So in-app assessment. Pre-post assessment, this is astronomy again, but a different app where they're actually queried on the phases of the moon on the pre-assessment. They then go through the Universe Sandbox app that's $30 on the Steam store, and then they go and take the post activity, and they're able to determine how much learning occurred as a result of that. Simulation case study, so I already referred to this one with the standardized patient, where in addition to observing him, the nursing student is presented with the case, what their respirations, their heart rate, etc. is, and they're able to see that and have the same information they would have in a clinical setting and be able to deduce what they should if they're in a clinical setting. And lastly, attitudinal surveys. So some of the research we've collaborated on is around student motivation to learn, grounded in John Keller's ARCS model of student motivation, which states that you should have attention, relevance, confidence, and satisfaction in any educational technology activity. So this attitudinal survey helps us to measure if it's actually helping the students become motivated to learn, which we found is, both anecdotally and through this research, is one of the nice things about this, is people all of a sudden are more curious about the Jane Temples because they get to actually go there through the VR. So, given those learning objectives, or that one learning objective you have in mind, how might you assess mastery of the learning objective? So this time, maybe just think about it to yourself for a few, maybe half a minute, and then we can talk about it.
Or you could talk with each other. It's okay.
All right, fine. In-app assessment, the pre-post, the case study, or the attitudinal type survey. Did any of those spark any ideas for how you might assess your objective? I see some nodding over here.
Okay. Yeah, definitely. So again, I think for how I would be using it, it would be I would be asking students to use their experience with XR to help their analysis of other objects, like texts or objects. So it's something like a post-assessment, or even in just kind of applying this more closer to an in-person experience to understanding how, for example, things place is represented in poetry.
Interesting.
Very good. Anyone else like to share? And it could be either the assessments or the learning objectives that you were thinking about as well. So at either or.
I think for my students would be if there anything changed after they were able to see we're using different technologies in terms of scale, color, application, and also what color could it do that in 3D vision is different than it is on computer screen.
Interesting. So in your case, the actual product would change, or the end kind of result?
Yeah, how's that impacting? Definitely it will be, it's a big change when you see in front of you.
And we've talked about that a little bit, that would kind of be a fifth area of either behavioral change. There's some empathy building capacity, certainly, that's been shown with XR, and things around global training and being aware of different cultures and things if you're doing business or other things like that. So that would actually be a change in behavior. But I think what you're saying is you would actually change the design based on, oh, that scale is way too big for that space.
Right.
I need to adjust it.
Or make adjustments within the design itself. It's very helpful. Because as you walk around the piece, one thing that I don't know if it exists, but I think for VR we can kind of do it's gravity.
Yep.
It does. So University Sandbox 2, you can actually simulate gravity.
Yeah.
And so that is something you can actually stop time and you can actually manipulate gravity.
Yeah.
The first thing everyone does is crash the moon into the Earth and see the explosion, which is pretty cool. But yeah, there's other, the orbital gravitational pull and stuff like that. It's really cool.
I think one of the most relevant assessments for the language context is an attitudinal shift, right? You know, we talk about intercultural competencies and is changing your behaviors and attitude and flexibility of mind, right? And so if we're going on these Google tours and getting into that, and maybe having a greater understanding of the culture from the inside and taking perspective taking. So I think that is a really effective assessment for what we want to do. And also probably getting students to do some sort of comparative analysis with previous learning strategies. Hey, what do you think about an AR overlay compared to Quizlet flashcards? You know, which worked for you and why, and what was your user? It's almost like user experience.
Absolutely, yeah. And I think that ties to the user experience. Also ties to like, was it fun? Was it engaging? Because you may even learn the content to the same degree, but if you're more motivated to do so.
Right. Yeah, and motivation increases self-efficacy, which is incredibly important in language study, because self-efficacy makes sure you're going to stick with it, and you're going to go and retention at higher levels and get it to those upper level Japanese literature courses.
Right. Cool. Any other assessment concepts, ideas, things that sparked?
Okay. So I think now we'll ask see if there's any questions that any of you might have related to the apps or anything that we discussed in this presentation.
Or the approaches we've taken within the CSU, either from building content or
How are you guys using this equipment? Are you guys sharing between different disciplines? Because it's very costly, so how does that take place?
I can actually answer for our campus. We've actually identified a neutral space on campus, so within our library, and we have a makerspace already. So we've actually made this adjunct to the makerspace. So we've identified. So long story short, space is hard to find on our campus, probably any campus.
Yep.
And so we were allowed to use this office space, and we could only fit 3 headsets, 3 stations in there. So that is considered a safe zone, right? Or not a safe zone, but like a neutral zone, I would say, because everyone uses the library. And so this space is a place where everyone can utilize.
So the approach we've taken at San Diego State is we incubated this in instructional technology services. So we're mostly there to support faculty. The library has the technology support and others for the students. So that's how we started it, and then the instructors for Astronomy 101 and some other very large undergraduate courses said, well, I can't fit 115 students in your small active learning classroom. How are we going to do this? So that's the point a few years ago that we started partnering with the library to have setups that there's 24-hour areas within the library and things like that. So the students could come in either through scheduling through their course or just on their own to go through their labs that were required for their classes. Also for checkout, so I know you guys are doing that here, and it sounds like expanding upon the checkout system. And it is still a little bit siloed. Like obviously it makes sense, especially with the rapidly evolving gear, where this is now like, oh, there's the HoloLens too, so these $2,500 devices are becoming obsolete. There are a few other departments on campus, like New Media, who went out and got grant funding and bought their own, and neither of us knew about it. So it's a big campus, 35,000 students. So it still happens, but we try to do everything we can to advertise through the news center and other methods to say, hey, we have this here, so if you want to collaborate. And we have collaborated on grants and things like that as well.
So not to say that on campus, like there are faculty who do purchase their own equipment and utilize it exclusively. With this particular space, the VITaL Lab, it is overseen by the faculty center, so it's available to everyone. We do have options though now to have mobile solutions, so bringing headsets to a classroom. So we've actually purchased 24 Oculus Quests, and those were purchased through a grant from the School of Science and Technology. So it's going to be used by chemistry right now because they're actually doing a research study on that. However, after that, I don't know what will happen. As far as we did get a donation from Microsoft, I was able to get some headsets for our campus. And half of those headsets will go to the computer science department. The other half are actually going to be loaned out through the library. So we did create a checkout system where anyone on campus can actually borrow them. So figuring out ways what works for your campus.
How did you get that donation?
Serendipity. I happened to so I'm also, as was mentioned, the director of our Women in Tech program. So fortunately being close to San Francisco, I happened to go to a Women in Tech event in the Bay Area, and it was hosted at the Microsoft Reactor. So I happened to go there that day, and it was a huge event, lots of people, and Microsoft just happened to be giving away headsets to every single person going there. Wow. And I said, well, if you're just giving these away to Joe Schmo and whoever else, can we get some for students at the university? And it was just amazing. Like they were just like, yes, so if I had known, if I had known you wanted all these headsets, we would have gotten them. I'm like, well, come on, universities always want equipment. So I just happened to be at the right place at the right time.
And I know Oculus, which is owned by Facebook, obviously they have lots of money, has a similar kind of ethos, and we haven't actually taken them up on that offer, but I went to the Oculus conference in November, I think it was, and the contact, which I can share the contact with you, said because I mentioned it, I said we're having a hackathon coming up, can we borrow some? She's like, well, it's easier for us to just give them to you. I was like, we'll take that. So I'll collaborate.
we'll talk about that.
So I think, going back to that diagram of 2% is education, I think the industry wants to get, they need to get people out there that are trained for developing on this gear as well, so it's in their interest to do so.
I actually have a slide that I did not put up here, but it's a projection made by TrendForce, which claimed that by this year, 2020, it's more like 25% of the demand will be for hardware, but then an additional 75% on top of that will be, if not more, will be for software. So this huge demand for software. Companies, the reason why Microsoft was giving away these headsets wasn't because they were being nice and generous.
Yeah.
It was because they wanted people to develop software for it.
Yeah.
Right? They wanted more software for their stores. So there's this huge demand for creating content, and the companies, all of the companies they're just looking for partnerships everywhere. So even if you have a contact at one of these companies.
I have a sibling who works for Microsoft.
Oh, there you go.
And so I'm like,
Should be texting her right now.
right after this.
I know we're past the end of our time, but we are going to be doing some demos for anybody that wants to hang out and see some of this stuff. But thank you all for coming on such a cold day.